Hello everyone, Sandra here with wet hair, because I just got out of the shower. Anyway, this is the life and channel update for June of 2024. That is the current year. I know this fact because I type it all the time, but here we are. Sometimes I have to think. And I'm in the middle of moving my sleep schedule around, so I'm a little bit off. I don't know if you can hear the birds in the background. It's 5 a.m. right now because I'm still up because I'm moving my sleep schedule around. More on that later, because that's now, and we haven't started at the beginning of the month. So, there's a lot that's happened this month. It's hard to know exactly what I want to cover. I think a few notable things is that we had some internet problems earlier on in the month. You can see here June 7th. My dear patrons' titles are really useful for remembering what actually happened in the month because, there's so much. Like, the last third of this month has felt so long. So many things have happened. But early on in the month, I mean, that was a week in. Like, there's other stuff that was going on, too. Like, the power company updated our buried electrical cables that, what did he say? Like, the 1970s? I don't know. I'd have to double check, and I'm not going to do that right now. But they had been in there for like 45 years, is what my recollection was. I think it was 1969 that he said they were labeled as, because I remember it being nice. But yeah, so they installed here. Let me move this preview window so when I'm looking at myself, it's a little bit more on camera. So the power company installed new power cables. That was like right at the start of the month. But yeah, we had big internet problems, like I said, in the first part of the month, and like we've been having problems with the internet, right? I think those who've watched my streams or stream VODs are aware of this, where we've been having problems with the internet going down, but also just like little micro interruptions and just various other problems had been popping up. At one point, it stopped serving IPv4 addresses and will only do IPv6, and it's like, why can I access like Facebook Messenger that I used to keep up with friends, but not Discord? And why does Google and YouTube, like Google services, work, but not like most of the other parts of the internet that I'd like go to? It was very confusing. It turned out the answer was weird modem problems that made it only connect to IPv6 addresses. I don't know. That was very strange. But we'd had a couple of big outages, and when we'd reset the modem router combo unit, it would go down for like 15-30 minutes to like reacquire everything. It was awful. So we've had that basically like twice in a row, like 2 days in a row, where it went down for a big chunk of time. And so my dad was like, we're not dealing with this anymore. Took it in. I'll say this, at least Xfinity like just took it and gave us a fresh new modem, so we're able to get that set up. And then I had a big stream the day after, so there's been more Guild Wars 1 streaming as a result. Well, things have been more stable. I've been really glad about that. Although I haven't done any in the last part of this month because of Shadows of the Archery, but more on that later. So yeah, had streams working properly because of that again, which was really nice. On the 11th, I have one of these that has Rules and Me, Important Observations. That's the title. So this is a really important one. It's good to review, actually, going through this. Let's just address something that you might have noticed right off the back. The lack of a chair back here. What's happened with that is I've been having problems where I will lean on my left side. And I was trying to figure out what to do to address this and other issues. Long story short, I decided we have this like spring stool thing that we definitely spent too much money on like a decade ago or more, that we got in the hopes that it'd help me with some various other things. But I decided to swap out the chair that I had been using for the stool functionally to see if it would help with like posture and other things, and in particular help try to address some of that listing towards the left issue that I've noticed that has been causing me problems, particularly like leaning on my left arm on the armrest would cause difficulties in what's apparently my ulnar nerve that has to do with like the bottom part of your hand. So anyway, I swapped that out one of these days here. Oh, it looked like it was the 15th. Cool. So, um, so I did that swap at like halfway through the month, and there's been pros and cons to it. But one of the it does give me a lot like more like it's a lot easier to kind of like move around in posture and stuff. I guess I don't know. It encourages movement more, and some of that is because it's not as comfortable in some regards. But it's hard to tell how much some of the issues have been alleviating, but I've not been having as many issues with my left side as I was having as I'm reflecting on it. So that's definitely been important. But backing up, the rules and me thing was really an important observation. I don't even know what, I kind of skimmed the actual thing itself just to familiarize myself with what I was talking about there. But and if you want the full thing, it's June 11th, 2024, Tuesday, and it's on my Patreon behind a paywall, because that's what my Patreon is. It's a paywall for dear patrons, which are my like daily diary entries, which sometimes have interesting things in them, and other times just tell you that my sleep is terrible. I mean, they tell you that basically all the time because it is. But it's a little bit of a joke, but a little bit not a joke. But what this was about was sort of trying to understand my relationship with rules in particular, because it's kind of a weird sort of thing. So, and it's trying so I was praying about it, and processing things, and I don't remember the whole process at this point because it was like 20 days ago or something. It's a long time ago. But what I remember as some of the really important bits is seeing the importance of. So okay, we need to kind of approach this from a couple of different angles, because it's not just a singular relationship with the idea of rules, right? There's a couple of different angles. There is, and I have to think about this in terms of Magic Color Pie. That's just the way my brain is calibrated for processing this sort of stuff. So I've previously talked about being Sultai, which is blue, black, green. Green is definitely like the base part of it. But those other parts are important as well. So there's a part of me that has rules for processes that are like, these are really important. When a rule is in place in order to accomplish a specific task, then I want those rules to be followed. So the example that comes to mind is like with Magic the Gathering, there's a set order of the turns, and the beginning phase of untap, upkeep, draw. And it always bothers me a little bit if people draw before untapping their lands or things like that. But the thing that actually really gets me is kind of weird, but in group prayer settings, if there's a specific thing, like so my church has a congregational prayer time as part of our service, about 10 minutes. And the initial focus of it's usually split into about two parts. The initial focus is prayers of thanksgiving and praise. And when people start asking God for things during that time, because that's not a time for asking God for things, that's a time for thanking God for things. And so when people start launching and asking God for things, it bothers me, because that's not what they're supposed to be doing, and they're supposed to be doing this other thing that we're bad at doing because we need to get better at doing it. That's something that bothers me. So if there's a specific like reason for why those rules exist, it's a certain process. This kind of ties into my blue side of like perfection, and some amount. I think there's some amount of green that can maybe feed into that, but it's very blue orientation with rules of like, this is describing a process. It's here for a purpose, and it's trying to do a thing, right? And we're not going to be able to, like, if we follow the rule, then we'll be able to do the thing properly, and we will have positive developments from that in some way, or be able to execute on the things like correctly and things like that. That's kind of the way my brain is kind of processing it. So there's kind of like that side, but then there's kind of what I'd call more of the black side of rules following, which is kind of a weird one, but it's understanding, to me. So when Mark Rosewater describes black, it's about having power so you can have control. Why do you want control? To be able to address your fears. Black is scared, right? The color black is scared, and it tries to address that fear by gaining control. Because if it's in control, then it doesn't have to be scared. But ceding control to others is scary. So rules can be used to try to manipulate people into giving, like, it's a way to gain control over them. If you follow their rules, then they'll be happy with you, right? So this is a way where it's an access for control, which in some regards has a little bit of blue elements to it. Blue and black are kind of known for some of that stuff with Dimir. But there's this element of, if I don't follow the rules, then there's consequences. I don't want the punishments, right? So this is where I really dislike getting surprised by a rule I didn't know about. I want to understand what the rules are fully. And there's a little bit of blue and black overlap here, so I can execute correctly, right? So, like, I learned to play Magic the Gathering by watching people play it in my college's cafeteria for, like, a year. My freshman year, I was watching people play it. And I don't think anyone really sat down and taught me the rules. I just watched people play it for that long and learned through observation. That's my recollection anyway. There's probably some instruction with it later, but that's my main recollection of how I learned how to play the game. Because, like, I don't want to just sit in there and try to figure it out as I go, because I don't want to make mistakes. Some of that, like, it's failure version stuff. It's a problem, but anyway, like, social rules and stuff where it's just like, how was I supposed to know? And then I get in trouble for doing something that I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do. Like, that sort of thing is a big problem for me. And there's also elements of like, if there's a bunch of rules for, like, how you're supposed to operate in a space, it can get very overwhelming, and I will just disengage. I'll have this problem with some Discord servers, for example, where they just have just a whole litany of rules and guidelines that are meant to make people feel safe. But to me, it's so overwhelming that makes me feel unsafe, because I don't feel like I can fully know what the rules are and avoid breaking them. And they're probably not, like, that hard to not break, as it were. But there's a fear related to that. So there's some important stuff there, but it also kind of fits into, like, some religious fears. And there's just a whole lot of different stuff there. So it was really good processing to do. And there's probably more that I could go into on a lot of that. One of the important things is, like, making like, one of the big themes that I feel like I've been having lately in prayer about stuff is just needing to be myself, and, like, trusting that God is using that, and not getting into my own head of trying to think, oh, I'm supposed to be like this, or supposed to be like that. So it's a big theme. But speaking of Magic the Gathering, Modern Horizons 3 came out. I was able to do a pre-release and a draft. There'll be one more draft that my LGS is planning on doing right before the Bloomborough pre-release. And I'm looking forward to that as well. But I'm going to be taking the chunk of time between the previous draft and that draft off, because they not cheap drafts. But I wish they were more affordable, because it's fun set. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it. It's like, it's what I want from a Magic set in terms of, like, mechanically laser focused towards. I love Time Spiral Block, and MH3. Modern Horizons 3 scratches that itch really well, and so I really liked it. Really enjoyed it. So I had good times with that. But some other things that have happened this month that are kind of interesting, I think. First of all, my sister and I watched a number of our old VHSs, and we used a recording device to record them. The tapes are definitely degrading. So if you have some old VHS tapes that you want to record, I highly recommend you do that soon. Yeah. But we watched The Last Unicorn, which is really good. It has a character to it that reminds me a lot of Lord of the Rings, and my sister said it's her favorite movie growing up, and I wouldn't say it was. I don't know if that it was my favorite, but it's definitely one that I liked. And I really appreciated it on the rewatch. Um, but one of the like a line from it that really kind of stuck with me is there are no happy endings because nothing ever ends, and that feels like that's a kind of the thesis of the movie in some regards, where you really feel that, right? It's we're leaving off of these characters now, but their stories will continue. We're just not seeing them. And we came into this story from somewhere. And so there's some very interesting stuff with that. So if you haven't seen the Last Unicorn, I think it's a good watch. And we also watched The Absolute Trip, that is Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I have not seen in ages. It's an Ian Fleming film. It was made by a bunch of the same people who make James Bond movies. And apparently, they were not initially interested in doing so, but after seeing the popularity of Mary Poppins, they decided they're interested in doing so. And first of all, this is not like this came out around the same time as Mary Poppins, right? It is not like it is an older movie in many regards. It is a kids movie that is 2.5 hours long. From like our VHS tape is from '89, and it had already been out for a while before that. And wow, there were decisions. There was an intermission about 90 minutes in because they knew you needed one. At least half the movie is like the father telling his kids a story while they're on a beach. And it was not immediately clear to our kid brains that like the second half of the movie was functionally a dream sequence, except as a story that their father was telling him. It is absolutely wild. The actor for Orc Goldfinger, the bad guy from Goldfinger, is in this movie as a villain, but like a comic relief villain. The whole thing is just, it is a trip. It is absolutely wild. So, yeah, that was something to rewatch. But otherwise, there's a really well done Christmas program that we watched that my sister and I were in as kids. That was kind of neat. But a lot of the last third of this month has been playing Shadow of the Erd Tree, the Elden Ring DLC. And I have been recording it. I have been recording my playthrough. There are 9 sessions so far that I've recorded. I will be releasing them on my YouTube channel when I'm done with the DLC. So there's going to be a big batch kind of releasing. I will likely stagger them. I'm not quite sure what that stagger rate will be, but I will intend to stagger their release. So it's not like suddenly 9, or it's going to be more than that, obviously, but I'm not done with it yet. But suddenly like a dozen videos or more, or whatever, showing up all at once, I'll probably stagger it over time. But I've been having a lot of fun with it overall. I think that it is. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because I don't want to accidentally spoil people. I don't want to be spoiled. But I have been, and that's why I haven't been streaming either. But I have been enjoying it a great deal. And there have been some technical issues with some weird frame problems sometimes at the start of some of them. I'm not really sure what that's about. But I have been enjoying it a lot. And it is impressively intricate. And it feels like I'm playing another entry because the map is disconnected, right? Kind of like how all of the DLCs. Have there been? I can't think of any like area DLCs. I know I didn't play Bloodborne, but I know it like adds on more into the base game areas. But I think most of the DLCs for like the Dark Souls trilogy, at least, all created separate areas, right? So you had like Ulasil and all of that. Although that felt a bit more connected because as in the past, so it's like the geometry is more similar. Stuff we'd seen before, at least partially. But with Dark Souls 2, all three of those areas were separate locations, right? But it really does feel, because it is so big and so dense and so intricate. Shadow of the Erdtree, yeah, is $40 DLC because they friggin' sold you another game built in that engine that you can take your existing characters into. That is what it feels like. So it has been quite a journey, and like my brain is still not like fully comprehended that this is part of the same game, and it is going to be absolutely wild. I'm looking forward to watching other people's playthroughs once I'm done with mine. I probably will start watching the Playframe playthrough that's coming out like tomorrow at time of recording. That's going to start coming out because I'm confident that I'm going to be ahead of it, and that's going to be an area where I'm not concerned about hitting spoilers. But I'm especially looking forward to seeing how this impacts like bingo brawlers and various the Zero Hit League and various other like the randomizer and stuff like that. The enemy randomizer with getting some of the DLC enemies into like the other areas and stuff, that's going to be absolutely wild as well. So I'm looking forward to feeling the integrated wholeness of it with some of that stuff. Otherwise, I also have started interacting or meeting with an old colleague from Vernacular Games about something that I'm not going to talk about because it is a private thing, but I mention it because he brought up Solo Leveling, the anime, and I have found myself into the anime hole. It's terrible for me. It is bad for my sleep schedule because what happens is I get engaged into a story and can't stop the story. So really enjoyed Solo Leveling. And so one of my biggest problems with anime is they give you 12, maybe 13 episodes to really get invested in something, and then there's no more, right? And it's so frustrating. You're just like, I hope this gets another season, but maybe maybe some of those will. I hope some of them will. I did watch what's it called here? That time I got reincarnated as a slime. I've been watching that one as well. It's I like the isekai genre to a certain point. Obviously, the execution is a big deal on all of this. Execution is more important than idea in many regards. But I find it very interesting that the isekai genre tends to have this pattern of. Excuse me, I'm surprised I didn't need to do that earlier. I still have this cough going on. I don't know if it's some allergies or something else, but the isekai genre is very interesting to me in that there tends to be this pattern of, and for those who aren't familiar, let me define an isekai. Broadly speaking, is where somebody ends up in another world. All right, so they come from one world and they end up in another one. You think of it as like dimension hopping or something like that. Typically, what ends up happening in a lot of them is they go from our world into a fantasy world that has rules that are in world setting stuff that's a lot like a traditional Japanese RPG, where you've got your big bad evil guy called the Demon Lord, or maybe they're a good. It gets complicated because they like play with conventions and stuff all over the place. But what I find really interesting, and so like sometimes they're like summoned into this other world, sometimes they die and get reincarnated into this other world. So that time I got reincarnated as a slime is based on that, where it's like, oh, it's a Japanese middle manager at a general contracting firm who gets stabbed in the street protecting a friend and dies and gets reincarnated as a slime in a fantasy world, as you know, all of its RPG rules and stuff. So, like, you have the tropes of, like, the hero who's destined to defeat the Demon Lord, and however that ends up playing out, and however they end up playing with all of that stuff. And I find that a lot of it is very interesting, in part because I like world building, and so the isekai genre tends to be heavily focused on world building, and in part because I like game design, and there's elements of that get wrapped up in there, too. But there's this pattern that a lot of them tend to have, in broad strokes, of person ends up in this other world. They realize living in a video game world actually sucks, turns out, and they want to make it a better world. and it transitions from following this individual learning about the world and their place in it into what I can only describe as nation building political drama. Like intense political drama where like half an episode is focused on a meeting between world leaders and you're engaged because you care about these characters and this world and this setting because they set it all up in the first part. But it's very interesting to me that like this is a recurrent trope in this genre, and I think that's very interesting. So I've been watching a number of those. There's actually been quite a few various animes that I've been watching, but also Freerun is really interesting. Not what I was expecting based on the little bits that I'd seen about it beforehand. But yeah, that one's a really interesting retrospective, more of a thoughtful one. It's not like an isekai or anything. It's just like here's a fantasy setting, but what if we follow an elf mage who's from the party that defeated the demon lord, that evil villain who's threatening the whole world, and now we jump forward 70, 80 years, and those heroes are dying off, and the history is now fading into the past, kind of like how World War II is kind of faded into the past somewhat, but even more so because the recording mediums and everything are different. And what is the relationships of these characters, and how do they perceive time, and how do they interact with the mortality of others? And it's been a very interesting, different flavor. It is a slower paced show. It's more reflective in many regards, and that one's been very, very interesting as well. And I've been enjoying that one a good bit, and I can see why it became popular because it's taking this fantasy setting and doing something very interesting with it. I've been watching a lot of stuff this last part here. There's also been my family watched through Strange New Worlds, Star Trek Strange New Worlds season 2, and I quite enjoyed that as well. I like Star Trek when it's more episodic. I like having a continuity, but I like an episodic thing where each episode is a self-contained story. That feels right for Star Trek, feels right for the nature of it. Most of it is in that sort of vein. And the more serialized shows like Picard and Discovery, I think that they lose some of the magic by not being episodic, and having like the episodes where they aren't having to try to carry a through line plot through the entire season, but where it's like this can focus on this thing and this can focus on that thing, allows you to be able to also kind of flip around on an ensemble show and focus on different characters and their relationships better, because not everything's getting caught up in the overarching plot, right? So that's in about half an hour. That is the month. It has been a busy one, a full one. There's more I could talk about. Finally had some dental appointments. My teeth are fine, so that's good because it'd been a while. Because I didn't want to have to make a phone call to schedule an appointment. I don't like making phone calls. Some people relate to that. Some people not so much. So yeah, that's where I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up for this month. So I thank you all very much for watching, and until next month, everyone, take care and goodbye.